That's Anne Marie Slaughter of Princeton University, formerly the State Department Director of Policy Planning under President Obama. Now to Paul Wolfowitz. He was the U.S. Deputy Secretary of Defense and a key strategist in the Iraq War under President Bush. He argues for direct assistance to the Syrian opposition, including weapons.
We should be supporting the opposition in every way reasonable, which doesn't mean bombing Damascus, for example, or occupying Syria. It does mean providing them with financial support, with material support, communications assistance, where I think we're doing a little bit, but I don't think we're doing everything we could do. And yes, weapons. I would say defensive weapons. There's no need for tanks, there's no need for artillery, and particularly, I think, to provide some encouragement for Syrian army units to defect. They're not going to be comfortable defecting in the hands of unarmed rebels.
You do hear this from people who say that arming the opposition is a bad idea, that it will lead to all-out civil sectarian war in Syria.
We heard the same argument for 3 years in Bosnia, and what it led to was prolonging. It is a civil war already, except it's one side fighting. Call it a civil war, but yes, there are some significant number of Syrians on his side. It's terrible what is happening there, but it will only go on longer and be worse if we continue to take a hands-off position. And there's the real possibility that Assad will win, and I can't imagine a worse outcome than that.
Do you think the United States in particular should be supplying those weapons?
I think it'd be much better if we're involved in the supply than if we leave it to people whose motives and objectives may be very different from ours, and in some cases quite opposite to ours. You know, this situation is moving. It's been over a year now. We see Syrian demonstrators actually holding up signs complaining about American procrastination, and Hamas, which used to be in bed with Assad, has now distanced itself from the Assad regime. I'm sure the bad guys are figuring out how they can help the opposition so that they can have a position later. The United States, I think, should be leading a coalition of people who more or less share our objectives in the situation, not leaving it for others. Leading
a coalition, would you say that any action should be authorized by the Security Council? Should the Arab League or Turkey take the lead?
I think Russia and China have made it clear the UN Security Council isn't even going to authorize a severe reprimand of Syria. But the Arab League is already very much in the lead. Saudi Arabia is out in front of the United States. Turkey's position is a little hard to read, but I would say they're quite active, and every one of these countries will be more active if they feel they're not alone.
I'm curious, as one of the architects of the Iraq War, do you draw lessons about the limits of U.S. military intervention in conflicts overseas?
Of course there are limits to U.S. military intervention, and no one I know of for 2 seconds would suggest that Syria is Iraq and that we should be involved in Syria the way we were involved in Iraq, or that we see Syria as a kind of threat to the United States that we saw Iraq being. But I also think there are many situations, including, in my opinion, Iraq in 1991, where we have failed to support people who were ready to fight for themselves, and as a result we ended up becoming more involved, not less involved. I think it's much better when people want to fight for their own freedom to help them do that than to end up having to come in ourselves later.
For her staff and us journalists, when we left, they were throwing bottles of water, they were throwing tomatoes, and they were throwing shoes, which is considered a real sign of disrespect in the Arab world. And they were chanting Monica, Monica. I think it was a reference to Monica Lewinsky. You know, obviously they didn't understand that this was a totally new president, or maybe it was a reference to Bill Clinton. But certainly it was a little bit harrowing. Secretary, though, never in any trouble, never in any danger. Her car and her vehicle were not hit. But one of the Egyptian officials that was walking out with us did get hit in the face with a tomato.
السؤال الثاني كان برهان غليون شخصية أكاديمية ليبرالية كان أصله شيوعي. نحن رشحناه لهذا الموقع ليكون واجهة للعمل الوطني. نحن الآن لا نتحرك كإخوان مسلمين، نتحرك كجبهة وطنية، كمجلس وطني يضم كل التيارات. فنحن اخترنا هذا الوجه المقبول في الغرب ومقبول في الداخل، وبحيث انه ما بدنا يعني يستغل النظام وجود واحد اسلامي على راس المجلس الوطني. اما الرجل اختلف عننا من حيث تفكيره. الله محيي الجيش، الله محيي الجيش، الله محيي الجيش، الله محيي الجيش.
Son of a... come on. Why does it always have to be so heavy to aim? Okay, there.